Well, welcome to Introduction to Philosophy. I'm Dan Bonneback. I'm going to be your instructor this semester. There's some information about the course that I'm going to talk about here in a very general way, what philosophy is, and then I'm going to take you through the details of what this course is really all about and what in particular you have to do to get a grade in. But let me start with just a few basic facts. This course does have a web page dedicated to it. You see the URL right there. philosophical.space/philosophy. Okay, so it's easy, well, maybe not so easy to remember, but anyway, philosophical.space, that's my website, and then philosophy, okay, for this particular course. That's my name. It is not that hard a name to pronounce, Bonneback, although I have colleagues who still, after 37 years, have not gotten it right once. And that's my email address. Okay, just bonneback@austin.utexas.edu. That's by far the easiest way to get in touch with me. My office does have a phone number, and it's on the web page and on the syllabus and so on. However, they installed a new phone system, and I don't know how to retrieve any messages. So if I'm not there, I won't get the message because, actually, I don't think you'll be able to leave one. There's already there are 99 unread messages, and I don't know how to get them off the sheet. So anyway, eventually I will learn that. But in any case, this is the easiest way to get in touch with me initially. Now, since you're taking a course on philosophy, let's start with a very fundamental question. What is philosophy? Now, philosophy is actually pretty exceptional in this respect because with most subjects it's very, very easy. For example, suppose I were to say, what is biology? What would the answer be? Study of life, yeah. What is sociology?
Study of society.
Study of society, good. What is psychology?
Study of the mind.
Study of the mind. Okay, notice these are pretty easy. But now I say, what is philosophy?
Study of the essence of being.
The study of the essence of being. Ooh, well, that's a very sophisticated and a highly theoretical answer. And indeed, from certain philosophical perspectives, that's the right answer. But one of the things you notice about philosophy is that as soon as you start giving an answer to that question of what philosophy is, you're doing philosophy and you're committing yourself to certain philosophical views. So it's a much harder question to answer than the average question about what biology or psychology or sociology is. Instead, in the case of philosophy, to answer the question, you're already doing philosophy. Now, I admit that in my own past, I haven't done a great job of answering this question. I remember calling my grandmother and saying, Grandma, guess what? I'm coming back to my hometown, where she lived, to study philosophy. And she said, that's nice, Daddy. What's philosophy? And that's sort of an embarrassing question, especially when you say, aha, you know, I've decided to go to graduate school in this field, I'm going to dedicate my life to this. And then your grandma says, so what is it? And you don't know how to answer. Now, anyway, I found that sort of embarrassing, and I didn't give a really great answer. But what is philosophy? Well, let's take a look at the word itself. It comes from two Greek words, one of which means love of or pursuit of, and the other of which means wisdom. And so it's the love of wisdom. It's the pursuit of wisdom. If the etymology of the word is any guide, that's certainly how the Greeks thought of it. It's a quest for wisdom. Now, notice other fields are characterized by what they are sciences of. Biology, the science of life. Sociology, the scientific study of society. But in the case of philosophy, it's not really the study of something or the science of something. It's instead the love of something, the pursuit of something, the quest for something. And that suggests an open-endedness for philosophy that those other subjects really don't have. Now, if philosophy is the love of wisdom or the pursuit of wisdom, that leads us to another question. What is wisdom? Well, what is wisdom, really? One way of defining it, you look in the dictionary, wisdom is simply defined as good judgment. And so one way of thinking about philosophy is that it's the pursuit of good judgment. There's an old joke that runs like this. One person says to the other, why are you so wise? He says, I've got good judgment. Wow. How do you get good judgment? From experience. How do you get experience? Bad judgment. Well, philosophers try to short-circuit this, avoid the bad judgment that leads to the bad experiences. and that eventually leads to wisdom, and tries to get to wisdom more directly. Tries to get there so that you can exhibit good judgment before you make all the mistakes that eventually might get you there by some other means. Here is one way of thinking about what philosophy does. It begins in wonder. Now, wonder at all sorts of things. Wonder at the world, its magnificence. Wonder at human beings and the marvelous as well as the terrible things we do. Wonder at not just the beautiful natural phenomena of the world, but the amazing complexity of the world. Whatever it is that inspires philosophical wonder, people begin by thinking, wow, there's something remarkable about this particular feature of the world, of us, of human nature, of society, of something that gets them started on philosophical reflection. But they don't stop it. I mean, you can go to various places on West Campus and find people engaged in wonder who are not really doing philosophy. They'll be sitting there going like, wow, man. Okay, that's wonder. But that's not philosophical reflection. Philosophers go beyond that sense of wonder to start asking why and how. Now, to some extent, any science begins with this word. How is it possible for this to happen? Newton, according to the legend, watching the apple fall from the tree, and so on. Everything begins with wonder. But philosophers begin a process of critical reflection. Try to provide answers and begin examining those answers. So almost every philosophical tradition starts with a deep thinker who says things, but typically doesn't write them down and doesn't produce arguments for them. And so if you think about Christianity or Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism or a variety of other isms throughout the world, they start this way. They start with someone who does not write anything down, but nevertheless teaches. And the followers of that person begin writing things down and trying to work out what was said into a system. And at that point, they engage in critical reflection. They begin engaging in argument. And philosophy involved not just that sense of wonder, not just a sense of reflection, but also then debate, discussion, investigation, trying to find out whether those views of the world are actually correct. There are various parts of philosophy, and in fact, we're going to look at three main parts of philosophy in this course. Most people would think of them as the three main parts, though there are certainly others. One of them is metaphysics. It's the study of what there is. And indeed, if somebody says philosophy is all about the essence of being, they're really saying it's about metaphysics. Metaphysics is the most foundational thing. It's about what there is, what the world consists of, what the world is made of. Now, there's a sense in which this is a project that physicists and others also share. But philosophers pursue this in the most general way possible. Not saying how many microparticles are there, but instead saying what general kinds of things, what general categories of things are there. And that leads them to ask questions about what is real and what is merely appearance. What is reality? What is appearance? What is an apparent thing about the world? What really captures the nature of the world? We're going to see some philosophical systems that are convinced that the world as we know it is really a construction of our own minds. Other views are going to say, no, the world is real, it has an existence outside of us, independently of our minds, and it has a nature that we can discover. Well, maybe we can discover. We're going to look at some philosophers, the skeptics, who say we can't discover. The world has a nature and can't get to it, and so we can never know anything at all. In any event, those are questions that we're going to encounter in metaphysics. And of course, we're going to apply those questions to ourselves too. So it's not just what is the world made of, and what is the world anyway, but who am I? What am I? What kind of thing am I? What am I made of? Am I, for example, merely a body? Am I a mind? Am I some combination of body and mind? Am I some sort of soul that has an independence from my body and my mind? Those are basic philosophical questions about me. A second part of philosophy is epistemology, the theory of knowledge. Epistemology is the fancy word for just the theory of knowledge. And so it asks basic questions like this. What is knowledge? And what can I know? How can I know it? What are the methods for producing knowledge? What are the sources of knowledge? Also, what are the limits to knowledge? Are there things I cannot know? And part of this will indeed be thinking about skeptical arguments. Arguments that say, there are certain things I cannot know, and in extreme cases, there is absolutely nothing I can know. Almost nobody actually believes that is to say, is a full-blown skeptic, thinking there's nothing at all you can know. But Nevertheless, those arguments have a real power because they challenge your ability to know any particular thing you care about. And so in that sense, they demand some kind of response. We're also going to reflect on the question of, well, I mentioned the sources of knowledge, of whether all knowledge comes to us through our experience of the world, or whether there are other ways of attaining knowledge. So, for example, it's not just good judgment that might come from experience. Maybe all knowledge comes from experience. At least we're going to encounter some views that say that. But we're also going to look at some other philosophers who say, well, not really. Our minds come built in, really, with a certain kind of structure. We are born with minds that already shape experience. And so there are things we can know just by understanding the structure of the human mind. Things that don't depend on the nature of the outside world, but instead define the ways in which we categorize it and are capable of categorizing it. And so that issue of whether, as it were, the mind is a blank slate, as some will put it, to be filled in by experience, or whether it comes with a built-in structure of its own, is one of the questions we'll be investigating under the heading of epistemology. The third main branch we'll focus on is ethics. Ethics is the most practical part of philosophy. It's the part that has to do with action. What do I do? What should I do? How do I go about deciding what I want to do? What kind of person should I be anyway? Those are the basic questions of ethics. What should I do? How do I decide that? And what kind of person should I be? And so we're going to look at a number of different traditions and their attempts to answer those ethical questions. Ethics is, in a sense, the most practical part because it directly relates to things that require, well, that affect us every single day. I might not depend in any given day on the underlying structure of the world or on some theory of knowledge, but on the other hand, I will have to confront decisions. I will have to think about what to do. And I will make decisions that have to do with the kind of person that I will become. And so those are things that I do encounter all the time in living. Okay, so what is philosophy really? Well, it's all of those things together. Socrates will say it's a matter of seeking wisdom and seeking virtue more broadly. Wisdom, but yes, all the other virtues. It's not only trying to become a wise person, somebody who exhibits good judgment, but somebody who exhibits other virtues, who is a good person. Other ways of thinking about philosophy, well, to lead an examined life, Socrates says. To subject things to critical examination, reflection. Not just to live without thinking about what you're doing, but really to stop and think about what you're doing. Reflect on your life. Reflect on whether you're being the kind of person you want to be. And that involves putting your life in perspective in a way, trying to see the big picture into which you and your life fit. And so philosophers will think, don't just stop with reflecting on the immediate concerns of life. Think about the bigger picture. Now, Aristotle thought it was a waste of time to teach philosophy to anybody under 30 because he thought that actually you didn't have enough experience yet to know anything about the world or yourself. But most of the time, I've tended to be wrong about that actually this is a key time in your life to be thinking about philosophy. Why? Because the decisions you make over the next few years really are going to determine the shape of a lot of the rest of your life. What career to pursue, what kind of values you're going to have, what kinds of things you're looking for in life. And all of those are basic philosophical questions. So in a sense, if Aristotle is right that later on, you'll be better able to understand some of these things because you will have lived more, he's wrong about another thing, which is that, in a sense, by the time he wants to teach people philosophy, it's too late. They've already made a lot of the decisions and commitments that then they're tied into. Much better to think about those things now and reflect deeply on them now before you make a lot of mistakes, rather than realize when you're 35 or 40 that you've made a big mistake and want to change your life. I've had some friends who were in that position, who had a very successful life, and around age 40 actually had a sort of midlife crisis and gave it all up and decided they had been wrong to pursue that path for them. How much better it would have been if when they were your age, they thought some of these questions through and actually came to the right conclusion about what they wanted to do with their lives. Well, here is a classic statement, you might say, that defines what philosophy is. Socrates saying the unexamined life is not worth living. Now, I think that's extreme myself. I mean, it's not worth living. Like, I never took philosophy. I never thought about philosophy. Oh, I wish I had. That's silly, right? But nevertheless, he's making a serious point, which is that a life lived without critical examination, without much reflection, without much self-awareness, is a life that is going to lead you, well, it's not only going to lead you to miss a lot of what's beautiful and important about life, it's also going to make you really unaware of who you are. You will be making a lot of decisions without thinking them through. Maybe you'll get lucky and make a lot of them correctly, but maybe you won't. And so his point is really that a life that involves examination, that involves reflection, is one that's likely to be of more value to you, likely to be a richer life, a better life, in a sense, than one that isn't. Here is another way of thinking about philosophy. It's very different, and in a way, much less practical in its orientation. My own dissertation director, Wilfred Sellers, one of the great American philosophers of the 20th century, defined philosophy in this way. Philosophies, he said, well, I should really start with the proper beginning of the provision. The aim of philosophy, abstractly formulated, is to understand how things in the broadest possible sense of the term hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term. Now, that's a very vague formulation. How things, in the broadest possible sense of the term, hang together in the broadest possible sense of the term. But he's thinking about this way. He's thinking, well, biology tells you about a certain facet of the world. Physics tells you about another facet. Chemistry tells you about this facet. Sociology, psychology, they all tell you about their various facets. Only philosophy tries to construct a map of the whole. Tries to say, this is what it's all about. This is where those particular disciplines fit into our understanding of the world and of ourselves. And so philosophy is not an attempt to map the details of any particular region of intellectual space, you might say. Instead, it's an attempt to step back and see the entire map, see how it all fits together, and see how all of those ways of approaching and understanding of the world make sense together, how they relate to one another, and how they give us an overall vision of the world and of ourselves. So he says, under things in the broadest possible sense of the term, I include such radically different items as not only cabbages and kings, but numbers and duties, possibilities and finger snaps, aesthetic experience and death. So all of those are things that we have to make sense of. Don't think of the world as just consisting of the things as described by psychology or sociology or economics or physics or chemistry. It's really got all of those things and then a lot of things that really don't fit neatly into those categories at all. Finger snaps, death, aesthetic experience, possibilities. How do all of those fit into our overall vision of the world? Those are complicated and distinctively philosophical questions. So he says it's the eye on the whole that distinguishes the philosophical enterprise, that attempt to see how all of the world fits together, how we fit into it, how all of the various special sciences really make sense together and give us an overall view of the world. Now, the way we're going to proceed in this course is a little bit peculiar. A lot of philosophy courses are organized by topic. A lot of others are organized by historical period. So you start with, let's say, Socrates and Plato and go up to modern times and so on. We're not going to do either of those things here. We're going to look at four basic kinds of philosophers, because I think there's some very basic philosophical questions having to do with metaphysics and epistemology that really divide philosophers into four broad groups. So there's an old joke, you know, there are two kinds of people in the world, those who divide the world into two kinds of people and those who don't. I can't quite come up with a similar philosophy joke. There are four kinds of philosophers in the world, those who divide the world into four kinds of philosophers and those who don't. Wait, that's only two. You know, etc. Well, anyway, yeah, good. Laugh at me for not being... See, it's supposed to be funny that I can't. But only one guy gets it. Anyhow, there are four basic kinds of philosophies, I'm convinced. This is true not only in the Western tradition, but in every other philosophical tradition. There are long-standing philosophical traditions in other parts of the world, in India, in China, a variety of other places. And we're going to look at many of those throughout the term, as well as Western philosophy. And throughout all of those, people fall into these four basic categories. Now, they fall in different proportions. Some traditions are more dominant in certain parts of the world than others. Nevertheless, there are these four basic kinds. And so this is a sort of map of the course. We're going to start down here with the empiricists. They have a view of the world that I think is actually the closest to the average person's modern view of the world. And so we're going to begin with the empiricists. They'll feel familiar to you. We'll start with Confucius, we'll look at Aristotle, we'll look at the Naiyakas from India, we're going to look at a variety of other philosophers. And roughly the first month of the course will be spent looking at that empiricist way of looking at the world. We'll look at their views on metaphysics, on epistemology, on ethics. And then we'll move on to a second group, the realists in that upper corner. They are people who, well, have a different sort of view. They don't think of all knowledge as coming from experience, for example. And so we'll look there at Plato, at Philo of Alexandria, at Augustine and Anselm and Descartes, and we will examine a rationalist tradition there. Then in the last part of the course, we'll examine the idealists. We'll look at people who think the world really is some kind of projection or construction from on. And so we'll look at some ancient representatives of this from other traditions, but in the West, this is a tradition that starts late, really with people like Berkeley, Kant, and Hegel. And so we'll look there at some more modern Western philosophers. Throughout the course, we will be contending with the skeptics. They're here in this lower corner. They are the people who deny that it's possible to know anything. And so instead of studying them all by themselves, like, for the next 3 weeks, we'll think about why we really can't know anything. Instead, we're going to view those as harpies that attack the philosophers of the other groups. And so when they put forward their own views about the theory of knowledge, we will then have the skeptics attacking those views along the way. So they will not really make up one large part of the course by themselves. Instead, they will be sort of waiting in the wings to throw spitballs at the rest of the philosophers whenever that becomes appropriate. So let's look at how those are divided before we start looking into details of the class. One is a basic division. Some people have said, look, all philosophers have to choose between Plato and Aristotle. Between the perspective on the world that Plato offers, a basically rationalist perspective. In fact, he's the archetypal figure in the West for what I'm going to be calling classical rationalism. And Aristotle, the person who starts in the West the tradition of classical empiricism. And so this is really a question of selecting the kind of view of the world we want. Is experience the sole source of knowledge of the world, or does the mind come with categories of its own? Can we attain a certain kind of knowledge of the world through philosophical reflection? The empiricist says that all knowledge comes from experience. Everything we learn by experiencing the world. If you had never set foot in this classroom before, and I never had before today, then what did I know about it? Well, the empiricist would say nothing, except maybe based on guesses that were founded on my own earlier experience of other classrooms. But I didn't know anything about this particular room at all. I didn't know how many seats were in here, what color the walls were, anything. And so all my knowledge is coming from experience of the world, either experience of the thing itself, or experience of similar things in the past, or other people's experience of similar things in the past. The rationalist says that's not true. Actually, we can know something about the world through reflection alone. There are things we can know that we attain knowledge of in a way other than through experience. Now, the rationalists will agree, most of our knowledge of the world comes from experience, but there might be some things that we can know independently of experience. What things are those? Well, we'll look at lots of examples in the course. Things like 2 + 2 is 4, or pain is bad, or things have properties. Anyway, some kind of knowledge of the world, they will say, is something we could attain even in advance of experience. So the empiricist here, studying the world, trying to develop models of the world based on experience, and the rationalist, reflecting in his study, thinking about the structure of his own mind and what it tells him about the structure of the world. And having a long view. Okay, a second thing that will divide these groups, the main second distinction, is the distinction between realism and idealism. This is the question, really, of whether the world has an existence independently of our own minds. So the realist says some things are independent of our minds. Some things are really out there. They are really independent of us. We might be here, we might be gone, but those things persist. And that's a pretty commonsensical attitude about the world. I don't think this room disappears when I leave it. I don't think the sun disappears if we all stop looking at it. However, the idealist says, actually everything is mind-dependent. Everything is a mental construction. Now notice that some things are mental constructions is not in dispute. The realists can say, sure, people dream, people imagine things, people write works of fiction. It's possible to have lots of things that are mental constructions, but there are certain things, a realist typically says, that really are not mental constructions. Like this, for example. And the idealists will say, no, no, no. I mean, everything is a mental construction. Even tables, even chairs. And typically the realist will say, well, then make that table go away. Why do I occasionally stub my toe on things? And the idealist is going to say, I didn't say you can control this. Sure, you can control works of fiction and other things like that. But notice you can't control your dreams. Well, what if the world is like one big dream? You can't control it. You can't make things go away. You know, it's not as if you're dreaming and the monster is chasing you. And you can just say, this is a dream. Go away. And so the idealist will say a lot of this is beyond our conscious control. The fact that we can't govern it with our own minds and can't will things into existence doesn't mean that it isn't really a projection of our minds. In any case, these are also basic, different, basic attitudes toward the world. A realist depiction of the world or an idealistic one is our own construction. And so on the left half of this, you see the people who are realists, who think there are aspects of the world that really are independent of the mind. On the right half, you see people who are more or less committed to claiming that that's not so, that everything is really a construction of the mind. Now, as I say that, I've got to say there are people who really ought to be represented as sort of toward the borderline of these. So this is an oversimplification. But then the top part consists of people who are rationalists, people who think we can learn something about the world by reflecting on the structure of our minds. And the empiricists are those who are convinced all knowledge comes from experience. And so that's the way in which those two basic divisions among philosophers give us these four basic categories. Anyway, I think it's valuable to look at philosophy from this point of view because you get a sense of which side people are on. That these debates aren't just historical debates among these particular figures, but that the same debates tend to arise in every philosophical tradition. Because in every tradition there are these four types of approaches to philosophy. And so in China, in India, in the Middle East, in Western Europe, in the United States, in Latin America, you will find many of the same issues arising. You will find many of the same debates. Why? Because all the philosophers end up being categorized in one of these four ways. Well, philosophy, I had a teacher in my intro philosophy class who used to say, philosophy is really the most practical of all disciplines. Why? Well, because it has to do with things that do affect our lives every day. What should I do? How do I go about reaching decisions? What kind of life should I lead? What's the world consist of anyway? How do I know? Those basic questions. What is the world like? Who am I? How do I know? What should I do? Those are basic questions we confront all the time. Now, of course, it's not necessarily practical in other ways. In case you can't see the cartoon, she's saying, Dad, I've decided to major in philosophy. He says, that's good. They just opened that big philosophy factory in Green Bay. Well, yeah, not practical necessarily in that sense. Though here I do have to give my little paid commercial for the philosophy department. Actually, philosophy majors end up doing better than people who major in almost any other field. That's the good news. The salaries of philosophy majors later in life are much higher than for most other majors. Here's the bad news. It's mostly because a lot of them become lawyers. But anyway, philosophy is the perfect pre-law major, but it isn't just that. It's really something that trains you to think. Think deeply, construct arguments, engage in a kind of critical reflection that ends up being immensely valuable to you whether you pursue it in the sense of doing philosophy or doing law or doing whatever you choose to do. Those skills are ones that are going to pay off whatever you pursue as a career.